Hi guys, how's it going? Brian from Brian Boas here. Although I certainly love all the boas in my collection, there are some that sometimes display annoying behaviors that can be challenging to deal with. Today I want to go through some of these annoying boa behaviors, as well as give you guys tips for how I deal with the behaviors in case you're seeing similar behaviors in your own boas. If you find this video helpful, please subscribe to the Brian Boas YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any future boa videos. So first I want to point out that every boa is an individual animal and they all have their own specific quirks. And sometimes these specific behaviors are just seen in one particular individual animal. Other times there are certain types of behaviors that seem to be more common in a certain locality of boa. And so as we go through the list, I'm going to point those out. It should also be kept in mind that in many cases a boa will have an annoying behavior, but it can outgrow the behavior when it gets older, or there's a pretty simple way to deal with that behavior and to correct the behavior so the boa doesn't do it anymore. The first behavior I'm going to talk about, you've probably heard me talk about before, and it's something I call squeeziness. And of course all boas, being constrictors, do squeeze to some extent, but some boas really squeeze harder than others. And if they have a very muscular body, this in some cases can provide some challenges and maybe even cause a little bit of pain when they cut off the blood flow in your hand. So I found that the most squeezy group of boas as a whole is of course the true red-tailed boas, boa constrictor, like this Suriname female. I mean, within the true red-tails I have some that really aren't that squeezy, but others like this one are just really squeezy. And as you can see, she's kind of jerking around, and in general they can be a little insecure if they feel they don't have a good grip on something, which leads to the squeeziness. And then of course they have these super muscular bodies. So this is a 6-year-old female. You can see she's only about 4 feet. This is just not a very large Suriname. She's not going to be that much bigger. And this is a great animal. She's a beautiful animal, beautiful colors, beautiful markings. You know, kind of sweet personality other than the squeeziness. So if you want to get a true red tail, the squeeziness is generally just something you're going to have to be prepared for. When I put her back in the enclosure, you know, she really wants to grab something quickly, so I make sure with these types of boas to use a substrate like coconut husk or aspen, something they can grip on rather than a sheer paper substrate. And she also has a lot of corkbark hides. That way she can grab onto the hides and feel nice and secure. Squeeziness is most common seen in the true red-tailed boas, but other types of boas can also have kind of a squeezy personality, like this Kahl albino boa. And I should mention that this guy is actually 25% true red-tailed BCC, which may have contributed to his personality. But you can see he really wants to wrap around, and he sometimes can kind of thrash around if he feels like he doesn't have a good grip. So he can be a little challenging to handle. Otherwise, this is a really beautiful boa. Just really like this guy. He's actually my first morph boa. But I know he's probably not the best one to take out if I want to handle a boa and show friends who are not really into boas. But with the squeeziness, you just have to accept that some boas just have that in their personality. And, you know, handling them is going to be a little bit different than handling a more laid-back boa that's not going to squeeze you as hard. There are a number of annoying boa behaviors that revolve around feeding. And one of the pros of having a boa, of course, is that they're usually not a problem to get them to feed, and they can be very aggressive feeders. But this can also lead to some challenges. So this is a 7-year-old Guyana Red-Tailed male. And this guy is a very aggressive feeder, and he'll frequently strike against the front of his cage in anticipation of the food. He's in a 4-foot cage with a plexiglass front. And I've heard about boas getting injured. They can get injuries to their jaws when they strike against the front of the cage. So I'm always really careful when I'm feeding to feed this guy first, just so he is his rat, and he's not going to continue to strike against the front of the cage and maybe injure himself. I also have his cage stack kind of in the corner of the room, so I'm not walking in front of the enclosure, which can elicit that behavior. And then another option for dealing with this kind of behavior is to just use dark paper, and you can, like a dark black construction paper, you can actually black out the front of part of the enclosure. So that way he's not going to see the visual stimulus of someone walking past which he thinks is food, and he's not going to strike against the front of the cage and potentially injure his jaw. Some locality boas have a specific behavior when it comes to feeding, and the Pearl Island Boa is a good example of this. So if you like the music of Elton John, this is the boa for you, because I actually call this guy the Rocket Man. And when I open up his tub to feed him, he'll actually launch his whole body out. In some cases about half to even 2/3 of his body to try to get the food. And it's very quick, he just launches himself out. I gotta really stand back. The Pearl Island Boas are an arboreal boa. In the wild, they spend a lot of time in trees, and they can launch themselves into the air to catch birds and other prey like that. So it's really a behavior that's specific to this particular locality. But in order to not get bitten and to deal with it in captivity, what I'll do is I'll use my feeding tongs, and I'll open up his cage, and then I'll quickly offer him the food. Just because when he launches himself, I want him to be getting the food rather than to be latching onto my face. And you can see when there's no food around, he's pretty mellow to handle. The Pearl Island Boas, of course, are a little more active than some of the other boas. You can see him moving around a lot, but it's not aggressive, so he knows, not to attack me. But it's just a little challenging when I'm feeding this guy, because he'll certainly will launch himself quite a few feet out into the air when I open up his cage. Another annoying feeding-based boa behavior results when a boa actually will try to constrict and eat itself. And I've seen this in a number of different boas. I think they're just very enthusiastic about feeding, and rather than using a visual cue, they're relying mostly on their scent, the olfactory cue. Whatever smells like the prey item, they're going to constrict and try to eat. Even if that means they're going to bite their own body and try to constrict and eat it. And so I try to prevent this behavior by offering the food item in front of them, away from their body, so they can grab it and they'll go ahead and eat that. But from time to time, a boa just gets a little confused and it ends up biting itself. I saw that same behavior in this 3-year-old Tarahumara just last week, where I offered her some food and she ended up biting and constricting herself. Not quite sure what's going on in their little tiny brains, but they thought it might be a good idea to do this kind of behavior. And luckily she eventually let go of her biting herself, and I was able to just feed her the rodent at that point. But it's kind of interesting, because what would happen if she started eating herself from the tail and then gradually worked her way up? Because I could come back and in theory she might just disappear altogether. So now that we're talking about annoying boa feeding behaviors, one of the most annoying is just when the baby boas won't eat to begin with. And I found that this is especially the case with some of the island boas, like the Hog Island and the Key boas. And in fact, those are my first 2 litters of 2020, so I've got my work cut out for me. But it can be a little challenging just getting them eating. And typically I'll start feeding them on live food items, like live fuzzy mice. And so this is a year-old Hog Island. She's eating the mice. She this is one of the few that started eating with no problem. But another annoying thing is it can be a little bit of a challenge getting them moving from eating the live prey to eating the freeze-thawed prey. And so this one is currently eating freeze-thawed, but sometimes I'll have to go through this behavior where I offer her the food item and I kind of jiggle it and dangle it in front of her and she takes it. But then she'll frequently will constrict it but then release it when she figures out it's not alive. And sometimes I'll have to go through that a few times just to get her to eat something. I'll have to go back, take the prey that she spit out and jiggle it again, and then she takes it and constricts it. Sometimes she spits it out again. So it's kind of this ongoing cycle. So the Hog Island especially, and some of the other island boas, they can be a little bit annoying when it comes to getting them eating frozen thawed. But once they're about a year or two and they've already accepted the freeze thawed, as adults they don't display any behaviors like this, and they're very easy to get to eat. Next, I wanted to show you a boa that demonstrates a number of different annoying behaviors, and this may well be the single most annoying boa that I currently have in my collection. And this is a 2018 holdback Honduran Firebelly Boa female. And as you can see, she's really quite striking. She's got this cool stripe pattern, starting to show the beautiful fire belly that this type of boa is famous for. And I actually held back a male and 2 females from this litter. And the other female and the male, they don't show any annoying behavior. So this is some specific quirks to this particular boa. But even though she's now 2 years old, she won't take dead freeze-thawed prey. I have to feed her live mice. And even with the live mice, she frequently will constrict them, and then she just kind of spits them out and does nothing. So I have to go back and I have to take the dead mouse and kind of wiggle it, and she'll grab it again and constrict, and then she'll frequently spit it out again. So I have to go back a 3rd time. So this particular animal, for whatever reason, has this kind of challenging feeding behavior. She's also kind of aggressive, and she's kind of behaving herself now, but frequently she'll hiss at me and strike at the front of the tub, and she's even bitten me a couple times. And she's actually escaped from her tub a couple times, and she's just sitting on top of the rack. But now I have her tub extra secure, so there's no way she can get out. But this is a particular individual which I just feel has a challenging personality. You know, her siblings don't have this personality. Her mother is a little aggressive, but you know, hopefully she'll grow out of this challenging personality as she gets bigger. So hopefully, if you have a boa that has some challenging behaviors, some of the tips I offered might help you out a bit. I also want to hear your tips, so please comment below if you have something to add. But I wanted to point out that many boas will start out with challenging behaviors as young boas, but they outgrow them as they get bigger. And this is a 4-year-old North Brazilian boa. And this boa, when I first got him, he was really hissy. He was always hissing in his cage and striking against the front of the tub. But he's calmed down a great deal. And you know, now I can handle him with no problem. He's a little active, but overall, quite a docile boa. But this guy was completely different for his first few years here. He was always striking at me and hissing in the cage. So if your boa is a little hissy as a baby, just give them some time, and many boas will calm down as they get older, even if you don't handle them very regularly, like this particular North Brazil true red-tailed boa. So I thought I'd wrap up the video with a type of boa that, in my experience, doesn't show any of these challenging, annoying behaviors, and that's the Argentine boa, Boa constrictor occidentalis. So Argentine boas have a really great mellow presence when you handle them. They wrap quite firmly, but they don't overly squeeze your hand like the true red-tailed boas. They're also generally very easy to feed. The babies start eating, no problem, even on freeze-thawed prey items. And they generally will eat the food when you give it to them. You don't have the challenges with needing to constantly be jiggling the thawed prey item for them. And they just have this great handleability. You know, so I've said several times before that the Argentine boas are probably my favorite locality boa. And a lot of it has to do with the handleability and kind of the mellow personality. They're just really not an annoying boa. And I've had quite a few of these animals, and have had several litters in the past, and I found that none of them were annoying. And it's quite interesting that if you read the earlier boa literature, they often say that Argentine boas are really aggressive and unhandleable. But in my experience, I found the opposite. These are just really great boas, one of my all-time favorite boas, and definitely a great non-annoying type of boa for your collection. So I hope this video was helpful. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy your boas.